Go to college, graduate, get a job, work the 9 to 5, make the money, spend the money. This experiment is on why we enter the rat race, how we can leave it, and how does it impact our definition of success.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to This is an Experiment, Episode 8, The Climb. So, Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How about you?
I'm chilling, man. Chilling as can be. Hope everybody had a safe 4th of July.
Dude, it was insane.
Yeah.
I've never seen as many illegal fireworks popping off at residences before this year. And I even saw a video of Sacramento with the fireworks, the illegal fireworks in the area, because there were no shows this year due to coronavirus. So all those ones that were going up in the sky were illegal, which is just nuts. In California, at least, they're illegal.
Yeah, I mean, the world's ending, so people are just saying. All right. So the climb. So basically, this episode is we're just so the last few episodes. Okay. Also, let me premise. We're getting some work done at my house right now. So in this episode, you may hear banging. That's the worker banging away at the floor. So just giving a quick not premise, preface.
Yeah, preface. So, and the banging is not sexual.
It's not sexual. That would be
there's no relative of yours just going to town.
It's not that. It is a worker doing working stuff. Construction, we'll call it. So anyways, so the climb, and it's kind of the last few episodes we've kind of gone really deep in science, and then the metaphysical. So with this, we're going to kind of bring it back to reality real quick, and kind of talk about something we all experience, all of us, in our everyday, literally. So people, what's the rat race, right? Let's start off with that. So what's the rat race? I guess the best way to put it is, it's a way of life, in where people are caught up in this fiercely competitive, struggle for wealth and power. That's the definition anyways. So we kind of get caught in the mundane and the monotony of the everyday to be as powerful or as rich as we can be. So what do you think about that, Nick? Do you feel that we are stuck in a rat race?
So, okay, as of now, we, as in you and me right now, I would say no right now, because I mean, we're just graduating college. So I think both of us now are at the point in our lives where we can make decisions to either not enter the rat race, to minimize the amount of time that we're in the rat race. But I think as of at this moment right now, I don't think that we are in the rat race. We might be in the rat race mentality. I, for one, have been in that mentality for at least the last year, thinking, okay, I'm going to graduate, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to work my way up, I'm going to increase my salary by working hard, and I'm going to spend my money on all the nice cars and the best house that I can buy and things like that. And I think in the wake of the pandemic, I've kind of it's put a lot of things into perspective, and I've realized maybe that's not what I should be aiming for. So I'm kind of taking steps to maybe shift my focus away from entering the rat race, or at least limiting my time in it. But I think I would say that a majority of our society is in the rat race. However, this generation, our generation, and maybe the generation after us, I think we're really starting to kind of, just as a society, shift away from this idea that you have to go work for the man, work 40 hours a week, make your money, and then spend that money on all these materialistic items. And so, I mean, that would be, I think, a step forward as a society to stop this rat race idea. But it's definitely difficult. I mean, when I see rappers post Lamborghini Urus, I want to buy that. You know what I mean? It's sweet. So it's tough.
I agree with you. You bring up a good point, because you and I right now, right? We're not really involved in the rat race. We're kind of warming up, right? We're stretching. And we're seeing, you know, all these people in this marathon, right? Society, it's in this marathon. They're all chasing this seemingly never ending goal of theirs. And there's an issue with that, right? Like when we get stuck in this race, when you and I we will inevitably be caught up in it. But I think there's like a point where you can escape it, right? Like you said, like we're all so caught up working, you know, 40 hours a week. And this is just, you know, in the United States. Like in other countries like Finland and places like Denmark, they work, I think, 4 days a week, and like weekends are completely off. Like there's no work, and they're actually rated like some of the best and happiest countries in the world, right?
Right.
Like year after year, it's not just like a 1 year thing. Like year after year, those areas, those places are rated like the happiest places on earth to live. So here in America, you know, a weekend, it's like Friday and it's Saturday and Sunday, right? But you spend all of Saturday recovering from the Monday through Friday trek that you just did. Right. And then Sunday you spend preparing for the following week. So really, do you even get a chance to stop and breathe, right?
Right.
Because we get so caught up in this race. We also, another thing is taking a moment to appreciate yourself and appreciate where you have come. But we're so caught up in this race, in this grind. We never stop to breathe and appreciate how far we have come, because we become so infatuated with this image of perfection and this image of stature, of having money and power. We feel that if we don't have that, then we are basically nothing. I know this is kind of delving into our first episode where we talked about, you know, social media, and if we don't meet an image, we basically feel nothing. But on a societal level, if we don't have the power, if we don't have the money, if we don't have these flashy cars, like you said, then that shows flaws. Yeah. And then within those flaws, you know, there's negativity. So
yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. It's definitely I feel like for the rat race to die, for like, just as an analogy, you would have to just end this the societal like norm of success, like how everyone defines success, right? It's like having the most money, the most materialistic items, the biggest jewelry, like all that stuff, and kind of just eliminating all that. And even now, I think that's kind of going away, and like a little bit, but also, you know, when you look at social media now, there's a number that tells you how many people are viewing your content, right? So when you see that kind of can be like, it's almost like a currency. Like if someone has 1,000 followers and another person has 1 million followers, that person with 1 million followers is viewed as more powerful, has more influence, is more successful, right? So even that could be viewed as a rat race. Today, I was actually at lunch with my dad, and I saw across the street there's this guy that is relatively social media famous, and I saw him across the street with someone else that he had hired, and they were recording a video, undoubtedly for either his YouTube or his Instagram. And this was happening right in front of me, and I was like, "Wow, that's crazy!" Like I met him one time before, and I introduced myself because he has like 500,000 followers on Instagram. He's been in like a movie. He has a YouTube channel. He has a brand, like all this stuff. So when I saw him, I was like, "Wow, like that's so cool that he like is doing that right there." And I'm like watching it and seeing it in real life. But then in the back of my mind, I was like, he almost has to do that because he has to maintain the status quo of what he produces in terms of content. He has to continuously feed other people what they want to see. And so in my mind, because I knew we were going to be recording this episode today or sometime this week about the rat race, right? So I thought he's not doing the typical rat race where he's working a corporate job 9 to 5 and making money and spending it on bills and rent and cars or whatever, but he's in a kind of different sort of race. We could call it the hamster race, where he's creating enough social media content to satisfy his viewers and thus generate income through sponsorships or whatever that might be. So just because you leave the rat race doesn't necessarily you aren't going to be feeding into some other system. And that's where I think it becomes very difficult and challenging to kind of navigate just livelihood in general. Is like, how do you leave the rat race, but at the same time not succumb to some other system where you're defined by what you produce? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. So even these people that, and it's interesting that you say that he's now in a different type of race, because even these people of power, these people of influence, especially within social media, right? They, even though from our perspective, they seem to have, power and influence. How far does that influence really go if that influence can die out if they don't meet their viewers' needs? You know what I mean? So let's say, like, like you said your dad's friend, right? So let's say your dad's friend stops producing the content that got him, these viewers or whatever.
Oh, sorry. This wasn't my dad's friend. This was, I was out with lunch. I was out at lunch with my dad and I saw this guy.
Okay.
I've met him once before, but I know he's like an influencer.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. So let's say, that guy, right? Like, he completely changes his social media presence. Like, he takes a different approach. His viewers are going to say, what the hell is this? And then he's going to slowly lose that influential power that he had. So it's kind of a paradox. Like, yeah, you have this influence over, over a number of people, but at the same time, that influence is solely dependent on those that you influence.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a weird paradox, right. And oddly enough, so there's something actually called the cascading effect, or the information cascade. And in social media, I actually learned about this. So imagine, Kim Kardashian, she has millions of followers, right? If she sends a tweet or whatever it may be, if she sends, it's going to cascade. Of course it starts small, but the reason it cascades is because those that she influences share the same information. Think of it as herd behavior or herd mentality, right? If a number of people are doing something, chances are you're going to fall under that spell and do what they're doing. And it's essentially human behavior at its core. And so how this kind of all ties into that guy that you saw, right? If he changes his behavior, if he changes the usual content that he's pushing out, that cascading effect is going to slowly die. And that's probably what causes the loss of influence.
Right.
So I don't know. I thought that was an interesting thing that you said, because ultimately, even though you are an influencer, you're still working, like you're still grinding, like every day to keep that image. And if you don't, then it's like, Yeah,
no, that's what's crazy is I think there's just so many different ways that you can be kind of, I don't know, like consumed by whatever career that you're participating in. So, I mean, if we're just talking about a corporate job, right, that I think that's like where the rat race came from. That idea is that you work to build wealth, and then you work the 9 to 5, you commit, a third of your life, basically. I mean, you're awake for 24 hours a day, right? 8 of them are spent at work, 8 of them are free, and then 8 of them you're sleeping in just a standard world. So you are committing a third of your life, and then you get an income, and then you spend that income on a house, rent, maybe a car, and then whatever other leisurely activities, food, obviously. But just that idea that you are a part of this continuous cycle, and then you have to maybe work a little bit harder to then get a raise or a promotion, and then you keep going until you reach whatever that you define as the top. But really, that's not the top. There never is a top. And so I feel like in that way, you are kind of getting out of the rat race when you do choose to like a different career path, like an independent contractor or an influencer or whatever that may be. But it's still not, the end all be all in terms of people relying on you and people needing something from you to kind of ensure that you're taken care of.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's important to note that, so the whole thing, how I see it, the whole premise behind the rat race, I think it ultimately comes down to habit, right? You do a certain thing a number of times for a consecutive number of days, you develop a habit, right? And you start doing this thing without even really thinking about it. So you work 40 hours, the average person, right? He works about 40 hours a week, right? So, and let's say 8 hours a day. You do that for long enough, you eventually build a habit. You become a robot.
Mhm.
You wake up, you go to work, you slave away, you come back home, and you're too tired to do anything after that most of the time, right?
Mm.
Rinse and repeat the day after, Tuesday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Some people even work weekends. Some people don't even get days off.
Right.
And it becomes this habitual thing. And even though people want to break from it, they want to break that habit, they don't really know how, right? So I think it's important to note that this is all developed from habit. Other than needing to have a job, needing to pay bills, that's fine. I understand that. But from just from like, to kind of tie it into like, I guess like in the science realm, since we talk about science a lot on this podcast, it's all about habit and it's all about behavior.
Right.
And interestingly enough, there is a way to break habit, obviously. And so there was a group of researchers at MIT. They found a way to break the habit in mice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a place in the prefrontal cortex in your brain. It's called the infralimbic cortex. And that area is responsible for planning and thought. And so what these researchers did, they used optogenetics to inhibit the cells in that area. And now what optogenetics is, it's basically they use light to either inhibit or excite cells. So it's basically the use of light to manipulate cellular functionality. And so what this did, it caused the brain, or that area, to switch from a reflexive and habitual state to a more cognitive state, to a state where you can actually think, right? So like, let's say, let's give you an example. You put a rat in a maze, right? And you give him two options. He goes left or right.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cheese is on the right?
Mm-hmm.
By default, if you do it enough, it's going to create a habit in that rat.
It's just always
that he's going to start.
Right.
He's always going to go right? So
yeah.
it becomes reflexive. It becomes habitual.
Mm-hmm.
You move that cheese to the left, he's still going to go right, because that is what his brain has now created as a reflex.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, I thought that was a little bit of science right there. So, ultimately, I think it comes down to breaking a habit. And in Game of Thrones, you've seen Game of Thrones, right? Yeah, you have.
Yeah.
What Daenerys said, breaking the wheel, breaking the cycle.
Yeah.
But it's like, I don't know, that I feel like that's a little bit far-fetched in terms of our societal, like I feel like we're just stuck in this societal stage where that this is all we know.
Yeah, but I think also that this is the time when it could change. Like, you see I think the internet really is making it possible that you don't have to do that. Like, you don't have to do the 9 to 5 cycle and then thus enter the rat race. Just because you see all these different outlets for making an income at your own pace, on your own schedule. You know what I mean? Like, you could do e-commerce, you could do social media, you could do YouTube, you could do Facebook. I mean, it just all those outlets, you can make an income with. And so I think it's an opportunity for a lot of people to kind of figure out and explore what they would like to do and try to make money from it. I think the issue with that, though, is that sometimes these things are super saturated. I mean, you probably remember about a year ago or two, I was super into the fitness influencers, and I was I wanted to do that, right? But that field is just super saturated, and maybe I could have made it happen, but I would have had to work extremely hard, and it probably wouldn't have been possible for me to do that, like put all my energy to that and also like continue with school. You know what I mean? So there's this idea that it might be possible, but do people have the ability and or mentality to sacrifice everything they have to then switch their mindset to like, because I really feel like that's what it would take. Let's say you're already in the rat race, you're already working the 9 to 5, you'd have to sacrifice a lot to just be like, okay, no more, I'm done with this. I'm going to do everything on my own. I'm going to figure out how to make money and I'm going to do what I love all the time. Like that, I feel like would be extremely challenging. But that's just, I think, the nature of the beast right now.
I agree with you. And to touch on your very last point, on happiness, I think that that's actually also something that's really important with this whole, the climb and the rat race thing. There's a lot of people in their fields, and you and I have seen this, like on an academic level. There's a lot of people in their fields that are doing something because their parents told them this is the way, right? Or because that is their culture, right?
Right.
You have to be a doctor, you have to be either a lawyer, you have to be an engineer. No shade towards engineers. I'm just, but right, like that. Right. We see this so much, and people, they pass this down generationally, and people, or offspring, they feel that is the only way to become successful. Like, if I am not these 3 things, then I have no purpose. And I think that is ultimately what is now breaking, like you said. Like now we're seeing that you can make money through other ways that aren't just the traditional, doctor, lawyer, engineer. And I think that's really important, because if you're not happy in the field that you're in, then ultimately this climb or this race, it's all for nothing. Right.
Yeah.
And
you can keep climbing, but you're never gonna achieve the happiness. Like, and that's that sounds like super cliche, like money doesn't buy happiness. I mean, everyone's probably heard that, which I don't think is completely 100% true. I think there's some nuances to that statement, but at the end of the day, you can have all the money. I mean, you've seen it in society. Some of the wealthiest people that are just absolutely miserable and or have taken, their own lives because they just can't like live with themselves. You know what I mean? And so it's not just like success. Okay, I'm happy. Like, that's not how life works. And so I guess I'm just like kind of agreeing with what you're saying and kind of elaborating on it, that it really is more than just climbing and then achieving happiness. I think they're 2 kind of separate ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like exactly like you said, like, sure, you have, you're chasing money, right? Like, that is your goal. Your goal is to make that guap, right?
Yeah, that dollar.
that skrilla.
Yeah.
So you make it to the top. Now what? You have all this money. You can buy whatever you want, but now what? What's next? So now you've lost your purpose. The purpose for the climb was to make the money, right?
Right.
And now that you've made that money, what is the race over? Is that it? So I think it's important. I think purpose is one of the most important and fundamental things that an individual should have when they're in this race, or, when they're climbing. You have to find purpose in everything you do, because if you don't, then it will be all for nothing, right?
Right.
So you like, I mean, that's really it. Like, you have to find purpose in whatever it is that you're doing, because if there's no purpose, then once you reach the quote unquote end goal, if there is one, then it's like, what now? What?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It would, I mean, what's that saying? Like, if you do something you'll love, you'll never work a day in your life. I think that's like,
yeah.
I think that's like such a true like statement. Just because, like, I mean, working isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? But I think the point of it is that you'll just enjoy it so much that you won't feel like you're working, which is, I think, right now, like I said, I think this mindset and the societal norms are going to change. But I think right now, very few people are in that place where they can say that they don't work a day in their life because they just do what they love all the time. I think that's a rare thing for people to accomplish, but something I know personally I would love to achieve. I don't know if I'm on the right path right now, but I think it'd be cool. But again, that's kind of like I said, it might involve the sacrifice of trying to leave the rat race or the climb, in that you might suffer a little bit to try to shift the way you live or your expectations. I know for me, I was like, I had this mentality of, oh, I'm graduating college, I have a good job lined up, I have a good career coming ahead of me, and I'm gonna, kind of display that. I'm gonna get a nice apartment, I'm gonna buy a nice car, and like all this stuff. And what is that, like, what does that accomplish? Probably nothing. Like, okay, maybe it like satisfies a little bit of my ego, but in the long run, like, that's not gonna like give me anything like in terms of happiness. So like, how do maybe I don't buy the nice car, maybe I don't live in the nicest apartment, and then figure out ways that I can use the money that I'm saving to then leave the rat race, store up some money to, just in case I decide, okay, this isn't for me, I need to figure out something else. I have enough money saved where I have a cushion where I can figure something out that will allow me to make my own choices and not work for somebody else. And that's kind of been my mentality, like I said, through this pandemic and kind of being at home a lot and just thinking a lot about life. That's kind of what have I thought about. What are you thinking in terms of, I know you're done too, so what do you have to say in terms of your own future and entering the rat race or not?
Well, I think the rat race is necessary. It's a necessary evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to work. We need people. Unfortunately, the way society is created or built, we need people to live the mundane. And as dark as it may sound, we need people to slave away 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, whatever it is, mm-hmm. to keep the cog in this giant machine running, to keep the cogs, rather, plural, to keep these machines running, right?
Right.
And what's sad about it is that some of them, like that's all they know. That's, they live, they breathe, they work, and they die.
Yep.
Doing that same thing. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And most of the time, like, nobody remembers them, right? So that's my biggest thing. And I think that we've had this conversation off the podcast. Like, I refuse to be that type of person. Like, I would much rather die working for something that I believe in than die working for somebody else's dream.
Right.
Because that's not my dream.
Yeah.
We are our youngest right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're never going to get younger. And the best time to take the greatest risk is right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you're young, when you and I were young, this is the best time to take a risk, because when we're older, we have responsibilities. Not to say we don't now, but the disparity between responsibilities from people in their 20s to people, let's say, in their 40s is big.
So, yeah,
right?
Significant, right?
It's significant, exactly. And so there's a thing in social science where the greatest risks also have the greatest rewards.
Mm-hmm.
So you can play a safe risk, or you can do a safe risk, and it's consistent.
Right.
However, if you take a big risk, in that there is a probability where you will get the greatest reward.
Right.
And like I said, and I'm sure you agree with this, but I think it is a necessary evil. I'm going to have to get into this, this race. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to get into it.
Absolutely.
But it's not permanent. And I think that's something a lot of people don't recognize. They can leave, right?
Yeah.
Like, I plan to leave it. I mean, this is what I'm planning. Whether or not I do is a different story. Because once you're in it, the money's coming in. you're seeing the money, and you're able to buy these things that you wanted,
Mm-hmm.
and you're able to be materialistic,
Right. Well,
you get comfortable.
yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna say. You get comfortable, and then the idea that, like, basically, you know, if you were to then say, okay, no, I'm gonna be self-employed, I'm gonna do this on my own, I'm gonna do what I want to do all the time, that's going to come at a cost of not being able to do all the things that you were doing while you were working, while you were involved with the rat race. So that, I mean, that mentality, it's like having, you know, a bunch of money and then saying, like, literally, like, gold, whatever, cash, anything of value you can think of, and then saying, never mind, I'm good without this. I'm just going to instead go work really hard and see if this works out. And so, I mean, I think that it's going to be very challenging for anyone to make that decision and make that leap. And to your point of risk, you know, the bigger the risk, the greater the reward. I completely agree. And I've, you know, listened to some podcasts of founders of companies. There's one called How I Built This on NPR. I'm shouting it out because it's such a great podcast. And you hear these stories of people literally like taking out, you know, second mortgages on their homes and borrowing from all their family members and like just breaking all these like laws of finance, like things that you just should never do, because if you mess up, like, you're done. And they did like all of them at once, and it's just nuts. And then you see what happens, and like now you have like the biggest brands. They're just like the, you know, the biggest names in industry, and you're like, whoa, like that's crazy. Like they were at the brink of like failure, like they almost did. And then now they're here. But at the same time, I always think to myself, like, who also did the same thing and they're obsolete? You don't hear about them because it was a failure. So, I mean, but it is interesting. Just that level of success, I think it does require sometimes that insane level of risk.
Yeah. And to touch on your point, we don't hear about those people that failed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, you hear about maybe a handful, if that, of individuals that were successful, right?
Right.
Like okay, Elon Musk, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he created what was it called?
PayPal.
He created PayPal, and then he also created one other thing. I forgot what it was. I forgot. He created that, sold it, right?
Uh-huh.
He put all his money into these companies that he believed in, right? Like SpaceX. SpaceX could have been a huge fit, and it almost was,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
There's interviews of him online. He actually cries because as the person is interviewing him, this is like when he was younger, right? Like when SpaceX was barely on its feet.
Mm-hmm.
All his like people that influenced him, right? People that he looked up to, they all told him it's a stupid idea. Like the interviewer was saying that. He's like, how do you feel about so-and-so saying,
Yeah,
you know,
it was like Buzz Aldrin, like, I think is quoted saying that, like,
yes.
like spaceflight will never be commercial. Like it won't work. Like it's a stupid idea. And like that's what he looked up to. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And you see him cry. But now look, I mean, as far as I see it,
success.
It's pretty successful.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think it ultimately comes down to, man, like, you have to take the risk.
Right.
If you don't want to be in the race, you have to take the risk of the negatives outside of the race.
Yeah.
Because, like, you know, like the rat race is the most consistent route of life, right? It's conventional. Like it's kind of like, this is the way. Like this is how life is. This is what you have to do, right. And everybody does it. And everybody, you know, whether or not there's outliers, right, within the bell curve. Like some of them are really, really bad off, and some of them are really, really well off, even in the race. But ultimately, if you leave it, if you go to unconventional routes, that's where the risk is. But you have to see if that risk is worth it. What do you think? Do you believe the risk is worth a possible positive outcome for you for leaving the race? What do you think?
I like to think so. Like I said before, you and I are both in the position where we're not in it yet. Like we've just gone to school. But I do, see people like my father, for example, that's been in the race his whole life, and there is something missing in that. Like, I mean, he complains about his job all the time. So it's like, I feel like the risk would be worth it, but at the same time, like, he has a family to worry about. So that's where I think it starts getting a little bit tricky, right? Because if you have people that depend on you, children and or spouse, it becomes, I think, a much tougher discussion. And like you said earlier about being young and being able to take those risks, I think that's 100% true. I think at this point in our lives, and anyone else that's listening that's young and doesn't have responsibilities of family, I think this is the time that you do take that risk and you do what you want to do. Now, if you do have a family, if you have people that depend on you and kids need food and they need to be clothed and they need to go to school and all that stuff, like, you can't just then be like, like, we're all going to suffer so that I can do what I want. Like, that's not realistic. So with that being said, it might be a tougher decision, but it's not impossible, right? Like, you could save a bunch of money. You could live within your means and save a lot of money so that you have a buffer. And then worst case scenario, if you can't get anything up and running, you can't like do something for yourself, you could probably find a job again. So if you have that amount of money saved up and to budget enough time for you to kind of get something going on your own, I think it's possible to take that risk. But like I said, it's more of a safe risk. Like right now, I'm at the point where if I fail, I could always go live with my parents. Like, I don't have any. Not that I would want to. That'd be devastating for me. But it would be a possibility. Whereas, like, if you have a family of your own, that's not possible. So, it's definitely something to consider for sure.
Yeah. So the older you get, obviously the risk increases because, then you have bills and you have family, you have mortgage and things like that. Right. So the younger you are and the less responsibilities you have is the best opportunity to take risks. Mm-hmm. And I think I kind of wanted to switch real quick. I wanted to talk about something else. It kind of goes back to the topic of people kind of going into fields they're not fully passionate about, right? Or if they are, we'll use me for an example because I think I'm a pretty good example of the point I'm trying to make, okay. Right? So there was a point where I wanted to be a doctor, just like in this race or in the topic I'm talking about. Like, if you're not a doctor, lawyer, or engineer, you're basically worth nothing. Right. There was a point I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be an oncologist, which is a cancer doctor. So I was studying biology. And then I realized that, I don't think I'm cut out for being a doctor, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I saw the difficulties that my friend was going through, and he's now a general surgery resident at UNLV, right? I saw what he was going through, and I was like, I'm not cut out for that. Mm-hmm. So I stopped wanting to be a doctor. Then I was like, but I still want to be in that field. I still want to tackle cancer because I was I still am. I was very passionate about cancer. I said, okay, so I'll go into things like genetic engineering. I'll still study biology, but I'll kind of shift away from pre-med and kind of focus on, becoming a research scientist. I took chem classes and I was like, wow, I can't do this. Like, this really isn't for me. And so there was a big shift. There was a pivotal point in my life where, in my academic life, I was actually talking to the same friend on the phone. And he told me something that really, really struck me. And I think it could kind of strike a lot of, people. He says that you don't necessarily have to be a doctor to have an effect towards cancer, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you can be in other fields and you can still in some way, maybe it's not firsthand or it's not a primary effect, you can secondhand cause an effect into that field, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm really good at design. You know this. Mm-hmm. People know this. I'm good at design. And he says, well, you can work for a biotech company and you can become, like a graphic designer or something, and design diagrams and infographics about cancer and about breakthroughs where we are, to kind of, because people love visuals, they don't like reading text. They like seeing visuals. It says you could do that. And that really struck me, right? And it was at that point where I said, you know what? I need to make a change. I left biology, and I somehow ended up in cognitive science, and it's one of the best decisions I've made academically, because I was stuck in a loop where I wanted to be a doctor, but I just didn't have the drive. I didn't have the passion to become a doctor, right? Like, you need to let go of everything to become a doctor. You have to sacrifice everything. And I just didn't have that in me, right? So to kind of draw it back into this, and to how like people that are working in fields that they're not entirely passionate about because they think it's the only way, it's not. You can still affect a field you can still influence a field without being in the field itself. Right. So I think that's something that's really important that people should know. You don't have to be a doctor to save lives. You don't have to be a scientist to create breakthroughs in science. Of course, it's the most probable way you will.
No, it's like the mainstream route. But
it's the mainstream way, but people forget that it takes an entire team, right? Like, we see SpaceX. I keep going back to Elon Musk, but we see SpaceX, we see the rocket fly up. People cheer, right?
Yeah.
And they look at Elon Musk like, wow, he did this.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's not just him. And he's said this. He's like, I'm not nothing without, my engineers. It's the engineers. It's the technicians. It's the people in PR. It's the marketing. It's HR. It's all these tiny little pieces in a giant machine that can help this happen, right?
Right.
So you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be, and I'm not trying to stop people from becoming doctors and chasing their dreams. I'm just saying, like, people that are having doubts, doesn't even have to be a doctor in anything. If you feel that you don't have like the full passion and the full commitment, but you really want to be involved in that field, there are other ways. You just have to find them. I know that's not much help, but I think it'll help people that were like me, that are stuck in a loop, right? Like, I'm 27 now and I'm barely got my bachelor's degree. It's because I was stuck in a loop. I was stuck in this like mindset, like, oh no, I have to do this. I have to do this. And that's why it took so long. If I figured this out earlier, I would have, had my bachelor's degree 6 years ago or whatever, but I didn't. And hopefully, people hear this, and by some chance it touches one person and it makes them realize, like, there are other ways to create influence. There are other ways to change the world where it doesn't involve directly being involved. Or you can carve your own path. You can create your own primary way to affect the world in a positive way. Right. So I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, but no, I feel like it was something that should be touched on, because because people get stuck in, like I said, they get stuck in a loop and the monotony of it. So I completely agree.
And thank you for sharing that perspective, because I think it is important that there are different avenues to making an effect on whatever you're interested in. And sometimes, like you said, there's you might just not be made to be a doctor. Doctors are a different breed, man. Like, let's just let that be said. Like, they're just,
facts.
It's just they're special people, and so just because you're not one of them doesn't mean you're incapable or you're not worthy of making an impact. Like, that's so far from the truth. It's just that you can do it in a different way, and you can be special in your own way. And it's just something that's not, cookie cutter to be a doctor, but you might be able to do something else. Like you said, you can make an impact in the biotech industry. the same way that someone else that's interested in football, let's say they're not built like a football player, they could be a kinesiologist and help the athletes heal or recover. They could be a marketing agent and they could figure out all the contracts and stuff like that. Like there's so many different ways that you can get involved in something that you're passionate about. And that I think really ties into this idea of the rat race, and that you don't have to be the standard employee for whatever you're thinking of doing. You could make your own business. You could be an independent contractor. You could make a YouTube channel about that topic or about that field and just talk about it because people love to hear that information. There's just so many different ways that you could be involved in whatever you're passionate about, that you don't have to do the whatever's, the usual, I'll say. Like you don't have to be the typical example of whatever you're passionate about.
I agree. Well said. Yeah, and that's exactly the point I was trying to drive. Like you don't have to be the standard employee to make an influence. And that's kind of why I said you can carve your own way and create your own business, as you said, to basically to kind of create a new branch or a new avenue to create change or to create influence. And so I mean, yeah, that's the rat race, man. Anything else you think we should input?
That's all I've got. Definitely a fun discussion. Well, yeah, I liked it because it was a little bit different. It was a little different than what we're typically on of this scientific level. There's more just lifestyle and personal. So I thought it was cool.
Yeah. I enjoyed it. We kind of moved away from, I guess, facts or like, research and things like that, and got a little more real. So yeah, I mean, I hope, people hear this. If there's 3 episodes I would want people to hear in our so far 8 episode podcast, it would be the first episode, which is you, the 4th episode, I believe, which is race, and this episode, which is the climb. I think these 3, if we move away from science, I think these 3 topics are really, something that we all can relate to in one way or another, right? And I hope, we've so far in our 8 episodes, we've caused some sort of, people to kind of change their perspective or change the way they think. With that said, I would like to pass it over to Nick to give some closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of crazy that we're at episode number 8. It's something that, Adenise and I have kind of, we're like, let's do this because we're both interested in these philosophical topics. And I think it'd be cool to share our ideas, especially with people in our generation, because there's not many, I don't think, that are our age that are doing this. So thank you guys for listening. If you're still listening, and I don't know, it's just cool that we can use podcasts as a platform to kind of share our ideas. And hopefully, I know I've gotten some really positive feedback from some of my colleagues and other people, random people as well. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode and have enjoyed other episodes. We're going to keep putting out content for you guys, and hope that you give us some feedback or constructive criticism, whatever it may be. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day, night, whatever it may be.